Greetings, ladies and mental gents, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of various stories from the internet. In this video, we'll be focusing on a story from the subreddit HFY, called The Best We Have to Offer. Written by Regal Legal Eagle, and the link to the original story will be down below. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. When humans finally started to expand beyond their system, they found that they weren't alone in the galaxy. The fact that the neck of the woods, so to speak, held many other species, all trying to expand at the same time. Through some cosmic twist, most species were about at the same technological level, and everyone started to do what they could to secure their strength. Unfortunately for humanity, their biggest neighbor was a race of war-loving half-machine bugs who wanted the systems humanity had just started to colonize. The war raged for 10 years, claiming millions of lives, but in the end, humanity had won, reducing the machine bugs' home to a cracked open dead husk while claiming their systems. It had been a hard-won victory, however. The human population had been weakened, and after 10 years of conflict, the economy was struggling. There was no grand federation for peaceful planets to turn to, but the recent consortium of powerful and wealthy species had formed. The Triumvirate was hosting a massive expedition for all the competing species to determine who should they invest their vast trade and wealth into. With their tech a little behind the Triumvirate and their resources plentiful, but common humanity had determined what to set them apart. Physically, every species had some skill or advantage. Humanity was more adaptable and tenacious than any of their neighbors, but it was hard to sell tenacity and adaptability. What they needed was to present something that set them apart, and made them unique in the galaxy. It was also clear that their neighbors wanted to stop them from earning the trade contract. Humanity needed to find the best that we had to offer. Agent Wakefield, please respond. Proceed, station. The cartel is aware of your location. You need to move. I'm securing the spatial materials required for our presentation. Well, secure them and move. Agent Wakefield cursed as she quickly began to stuff the packages into the secure metal box that had been provided. The genetic lock should make sure that she was the only one that could open it, but their enemies would just destroy it rather than open it. Their last shipment of supplies waiting at the Triumvirate conference had been sabotaged, and they had to send the replacements through a courier. Only the Triumvirate had ships fast enough to make it to Earth and back in time, and humanity had paid handsomely for the service. She was in a secure room in the Courier office at a massive space station that had been constructed just for this trade show. It was a sprawling mass of orbiting the Triumvirate's recently colonized Eden world, Chryslian. All three species had colonized it to showcase their solidarity, but this trade station was a real draw. Over 15 square miles of rooms, hallways, meeting rooms, docking bays, and of course, the main trade conference center. The Courier office was on the far arm, away from the trade conference at the edge of the station. She had quite a ways to go to make it back in time. Tucking the box into a secret pocket, then she stepped out of the secure room and was suddenly face to face with two energy pistols. They were being held by a pair of lanky green deckish thugs. They were humanoids in subpar intelligence that were employed by the cartel. "Give it up, human." The other species in the office screamed at the sight of the weapons and ran out of the office, leaving her alone with the two thugs. "Oh dear me, is this a robbery? Oh my, oh my. But why do you want the pictures of my grandchildren? I'm a poor old grandmother." The thugs frowned at it and examined the human in front of them. It was a female that was partially hunched over, with pure white hair and a floral dress that covered everything but her hands and face. She had a worried face that looked wrinkled and aged. Their implants were informing them that she was likely a human grandmother, based on age and appearance. They lowered their guns, and one pulled out a communicator. "Boss, it's us. The ones you told us to stop the human in the Courier office. I think it's the wrong one, boss. It's really old." As the thugs stood around talking in the communicator, the old lady slowly reached into her dress before either could stop her, and quickly yanked free a stunner. Quickly zapping each of them, they jerked and twisted as electricity coursed through their bodies, and the agent smiled. She then pulled away from the dress to reveal a black catsuit beneath it, with the utility belt and various weapons strapped about her body, not to mention the secure box on her back, the wrinkles on her face flickering away as she deactivated her costume. But the white hair was still white. "Sorry, boys, my hair is just like this." She pulled a knife from her thigh, but then looked up as the door in the office burst open, a massive Gulk bull lumbering in, carrying a heavy repeater that she thought could only be mounted on a grav tank. "Gotta run, fellas." She sprinted out of the side as the Gulk took aim, bolts streaming through the air as she sprinted, jumping forward onto her hands and then springing up to crash through the window feet first. The bolts were still streaming around her as she landed with a roll and sprang to her feet. The station's broad streets had screaming civilians running every which way, as she was more cartel thugs running her way, Gulks and Deckish alike. She pulled a pistol free and ran forward, tapping a device on her belt. For her mission, the agent had been provided with the very best gear that humanity could make, and a few pieces that they had to buy from elsewhere. This was one of those Xeno trinkets that she had hoped that they could replicate soon. The device hummed to life, and suddenly she was in a bubble of modified gravity. It would nullify the pull against her when she jumped, and reorient it according to her position when she landed. So, the cartel took aim as she leapt, sailing through the high into the air as she spun, feet touching the ceiling as the device reversed the local gravity around her. She sprinted forward along the ceiling, and they began to fire, trying to readjust their aim. But then she just jumped again, landing on the roof of one of the local structures in the section of the station. All around her the vents and machinery were peppered with bolts, and then she jumped to the ground at the end of the street, rolling and springing forward, which sent her flying forwards thanks to the device on her belt. Once she was around the corner, she deactivated the gravity reorganizer and quickly checked her implant. It was another 8 miles to the conference center. She had no idea how many cartel thugs were between her and her objective. She needed a way to move faster. The mag trains. She quickly routed to the nearest station. Half a mile ahead and sprinting forward, Agent Wakefield's vitals were in the corner of her eye, and she could monitor her blood oxygen levels. The modifications she'd received making her stronger, faster, and tougher than a normal human. They hadn't gone full cyborg like those bugs they'd waged war with, but they'd learned how to make more subtle improvements. Her implants informed her a train would soon be arriving and sent her head down sprinting as fast as she could, ducking and spinning around the civilians in her way, as they yelled at her angrily. Once she was past them. Rounding the corner into the station, she leapt clean over the ticket taker and rolled into the open door of the mag train just as it began to close. The other Xenos on board gave her a surprised look, but she smiled and stood, holding onto the overhead handle as the machine started forward. There was a slight jerk as if the interior of the station, now racing along the outside, in space. She motioned to the map in her implant, smiling as they suddenly miled closer, and another half mile before the train slowed down to the next station. If her luck held out, she would ride us all the way to the conference center. There was the slight jerk as it entered the atmosphere again, and stopped for the next station. Doors opening. Civilians got on and off, and she smiled. But then, just before the doors closed, she saw 2 Gulks and 3 Deckish jump onto the first car. She cursed and moved down to the last car, hiding around the bulkhead from the door, out of the line of sight down the train. She couldn't use her guns since the bullets might break the glass windows and send it all into space. She heard the gasps as people of the cartel's thugs walked along the cars while the train got moving again, hearing their footsteps getting closer. Wakefield pulled that knife up from her thigh once more, the heavy Gulk stepping through the door, looking around, and as he turned to see her, that knife was driven straight into his eye. The creature didn't even have time to scream as its heavy bulk dropped to the ground. A Deckish stepped forward, gun raised, but Wakefield grabbed his arm and drove her knee into its ribs. She heard a crunch as he grunted out an obvious pain, and she turned, putting his arm to toss him into the wall behind her. The next Deckish had a humming energy blade that charged forward. She quickly parried it with her own knife and danced back, careful to keep him between her and the others. She lashed out with his knife, as she ducked again and spun, kicking his feet from underneath him and driving her knife into his throat as well. Then she rolled over his body, grabbed his energy blade and throwing it as she got up, watching it sink into the chest of the third Dakish. As it fell, the Gulk behind him just growled, slamming one meaty fist into his palm. The Gulk had to weigh around 600 pounds. They possessed pointed horns for gouging, a thick leather skin resistant to blades, and had a bone structure as dense as some light tanks. Wakefield pulled her pistol free and shot him right through one eye. Even point-blank, a pistol round couldn't penetrate their skulls, so it was just rattled around inside, pulping his brain matter without even risking her breaking the glass window on the train. The bigger they come, the harder they fall. As the body fell to the ground with a heavy thud, she smiled and holstered her pistol, and then she heard the civilians gasping and pointing. She turned to see a Tacom assault craft outside, speeding alongside the train. Oh damn. She began to run forward as the bolt slammed into the car and the screams of civilians filling the air, which was quickly sucked out of the holes of the newly shattered windows. She pulled up a mask from her belt and snapping it into place as the smart fibers quickly expanded around her head, sealing it into place. She activated the device on her belt, diving and ducking as the Xeno civilian sailed past her, sucked out into space. Pulling her pistol free again, and she shot the side window on the front car as she ran towards it, making sure that it was starting to break just as she jumped forward, sailing out into space as the shards of glass bumped off her smart fiber suit. The four-armed Temkin gunner on the other side of the assault craft blinked in surprise as the human was suddenly sailing towards him, but as he tried to pull up his hands to grab her, she turned, touching him feet first. The gravity reorganizer instantly focused on her momentum and gravity onto the points of her feet, crashing the Temkin's chest and sending the body flying through the open door through the assault craft. The interior was open, normally meant to hold a tank and assault squad, but this craft was only carrying that gunner and the pilot, who was looking back at her, quickly trying to pull his wave blaster free. She stepped forward, leaning into it, and punched him in the face with his pressure suit, the glass cracking as he was knocked out, but that made him slump forward against the controls. The assault craft dove forward then, as Wakefield jerked and held on to avoid being tossed out into space. Looking through the viewpoint, she saw the craft diving towards the station, and that the pilot shot up the train was slowly putting into, sparking and smoking as it arrived, the civilians inside gasping at the sight of the train. But then they cried and pointed at the craft that followed it in, smashing through the glass on top of the station, now decompressing the station itself. More Xenos were sucked into space as Wakefield held onto the craft with all of his strength, the gravity device almost out of power. It slammed into the platform, sliding through the ticket terminal, sparks of metal flying as it scraped along the floor of the station. It bust through another wall and out into the street beyond, hitting some of the sort of food stall which must have used gas to cook as something exploded. Fire rained down on the local stores. More civilians were screaming and running as sirens sounded all around the area. Blast doors slowly descending to seal off the area, but Wakefield was already out of the crashed craft, sprinting forward as she dove and slid under one of those heavy doors as it fell into place behind her with a solid thud. As she stood up and glanced at her map, 4 miles to go. Agent Wakefield, what's your status? We have reports of fighting in the station. You could say there was an explosive situation, she replied as she pulled the mask off her face. She didn't want to waste her oxygen reserves. Looking around, she saw running civilians, but no cartel thugs just now. She began to run forward once more, looking at her map to try and determine the best course of action. Can't you send me the Marines? Negative, Agent Wakefield. The cartel is a criminal organization. We're a government. We cannot bring military operations onto foreign territory without permission. Wakefield sighed as she shook her head and continued to run. Just as she entered another intersection, however, she saw a flash of light in her peripheral vision and quickly ducked and rolled. A high-energy bolt sailed through the air where her head had been. She dove behind an automated cleaning droid that was slowly scrubbing the street as more bolts slammed into the area around her. She pressed her back and the droid, moving along to next to it. She had no other good cover along the street, but if the droid got closer to the access hatch, then a bolt slammed into the droid, which whined and coughed and then died. Growling, she edged along the droid, keeping her head down. As she reached the front of it, she pulled out a small wire from her pocket on her belt, angling it around the corner. Her implant switched over to vision from the tiny cable camera as she examined the area. Tabkin's sniper team on the roof of the bank in the center of the block. She pulled back the cable and tugging it away. She could hear the civilians crying out in surprise, and heard people moving. Cartel thugs had been closing in on her location. Sure enough, she saw a Dakish burst out of the shop in front of her, on the exposed side of the droid that she was taking cover behind. She shot him through the throat as a pistol and fired a few more rounds just to keep the others behind him from rushing forward. She quickly pulled out a spear from her belt, pushing a button on the cover and tossing it in the air. There was a hiss as grey smoke began to pour out of it. And yet, as the Takum sniper switched his scope over to heat, his whole field of vision was red. As he kept cycling vision modes, something was impairing his vision on every one. The Gulks and Dakish had charged in anyway, and the smoke slowly cleared, and the clearing droid was alone. They looked around, and none noticed the access hatch on the streets was slowly clicking back into place. Wakefield moved along quietly as she could, partially hunched over in the small access space. Scurrying along, she finally found a more open section. Stepping out into the section of the crosswalk and pipes, leading to various humming and charging machines. There were Rillians crewing the stations. Thick black goggles covered their 4 eyes, oil staining their scales. When they saw her, she heard one shout, "Hey! That's got to be the human the cartel is offering a bounty for!" And they quickly started to run along the catwalks to rush at her. Wakefield sighed and readied herself. The first ran at her, and a large wrench in his hands. He swung it overhead at her, but she quickly turned to avoid the strike, elbowing him in the face and driving her knee into his chest as he pulled it down into it. Then she had to lean back over the railing, watching as the blade arced over her face as another slashed at her. Then he tried to stab down, but she rolled to avoid it, and grabbed his arm, driving her knee into his stomach, and then tossing him over the edge of the railing. He screamed out as he fell to the floor below. 2 were charging up the metal stairs to get to her as she jumped, grabbing a pipe to swing her feet forward, kicking the lead one as she drove him back, crying out as he toppled and fell back down the stairs on top of the one behind him. Jumping down and landing on top of them, a good measure, she only had a few more to go. One more ran at her, swinging with a wrench, wildly. She just rolled past and grabbed his leg, and yanked it to make him fall to the floor of the catwalk, quickly kicking him in the head to keep him down. Then another grabbed her from behind, hugging her arms to her chest as another moved in, but she just stomped on his foot, making him howl in pain as he broke his hold. Then she grabbed his arm, bending it over as she tossed him over her shoulder into the one in front of her. Turning, she only had one more to deal with, but was surprised when he leaned forward, knocking his skull into her own. Both her and her attacker gasped out in pain then, each clutching their forehead as they staggered around. "Ow, my head!" he groaned out as she grunted and clutched her own skull. "The frick? I don't know," he muttered and sort of just staggered to a crate and sat down. She straightened up slowly, wincing as she kept an eye closed because her brain told her to. It just felt right. She approached the Rillian, who looked up in time to see her fist as she clocked him in the face as he slumped off the crate. "Frecker," she muttered, and held her forehead with one hand as she walked on, the Rillians behind her groaning in pain or lying unconscious. Then she heard the hum of a lift and saw the Rillian with a bunch of electrical gear step off the platform in front of her. Along the wall of the station, he looked around at the groaning, injured workers and then at her. Slowly he stepped aside and motioned to the lift. Feel free to use it, hopefully without beating me up." She stepped onto the metal platform and pressed the lever to get it humming forward, back to the way the electrician had come from. She shook her head a little as she blinked for the finally got her senses back from the headbutt. The lift hummed along in the maintenance corridor until the main streets of the station, until she came to a junction at the end of the ladder going up, and catwalks heading either way. Her implant told her that she had 1.5 miles to go. She was about to head up onto the street level when the station contacted her again. "Wakefield, we've found the cartel's command post." And an indicator flashed on her map, and she smiled. Pulling her mask free, she sealed it into place. And instead of heading up onto the street, she walked the other side, approaching the airlock. She pulled the maintenance pressure suit free, putting it on, and grabbed some gear. Nothing but an ordinary maintenance worker to see here. And she opened up the airlock and stepped out into the outside of the station. "Where the hell is that human?" the cartel boss, literally slimy Eurovian, screamed out at the thugs in front of him from behind his desk. He had an aquarium of rare and exotic fish on the wall behind him, many endangered and illegal to own. The pelts and heads of various endangered animals decorated the floors and walls of his office. There were a number of Deckish, Gulk, and Takum in front of him, getting chewed out for being unable to stop a single human. He was in the middle of yelling at them when they heard something tap on the glass window to the side. Everyone looked out the window and saw the pressure suit of a maintenance worker wave at them. A few Deckish waved back, unsure what was going on. Then the figure slapped a plastic brick on the window and jumped away. "Ah, crap," was the last thing the cartel boss said before the brick exploded, sucking them all out into space. The fish aquarium just swam on, unaware of what had happened. After a nice little spacewalk, Wakefield finally stepped back into the station proper. Right next to the trade conference center, she pulled out the bulkier suit off, back in a form-fitting black catsuit. She walked up the stairs and onto the main street leading to the important center, finding a large number of skulking guards. The Skulkians were one of the triumvirates, a species of multi-limbed scorpion-like insectoids. They were incredibly hardy and durable in combat, especially hand-to-hand. "Halt, human. There has been fighting in the station. We need to see your ID before you can enter." "That's fine." She smiled and reached in her pocket to grab her ID. It was empty. She frowned and began to pat herself down as she suddenly realized her ID was sitting in that secure courier room back where she started. Hold on a second." She turned away from them and tapped her comm. "Station, I'm outside. I forgot my ID." There was a high sigh over the line. "I'll be right there." She turned back and smiled at the guards. Then, as she waited, she swung her arms back and forth, lightly clapping them together while whistling. Finally, the human diplomat stepped up behind the guards, speaking to them as she was led by. She smiled and pulled a secure box from her back, walking into the trade conference ready to show the triumvirate something that no other species had ever thought of. About an hour later, they were standing in front of the panel of triumvirate ambassadors. The Skulkians were the muscle, strong and solid. The Fenix were the engineers, inquisitive and intelligent, while the noble Norvians in the center were the diplomats, since they were so charismatic and cunning. The human diplomat and Agent Wakefield stood before them as they inspected what the human delegation had set before them. "This is what you bring us. We've seen inventions and materials and more, and you simply bring us food," the tall, graceful Norvian said as he inspected the plate in front of him. "This is the best that you have to offer. It's a family recipe. My family handed down generation to generation," Agent Wakefield said with a smile. "They're called chocolate chip cookies. Try them." The delegates picked up the small, hot discs in front of them and gingerly bit off a piece. They all started to nod and then hum happily as they tasted it, quickly finishing the first that they had picked up. "Our large shipment of materials to make you these was sabotaged, so we had to make a much smaller batch. You each have 3, and a small box to share. If you guys give us more time, we can make you more," the diplomats were saying. The delegates ate the cookies quickly, never having had anything like it before. "You see, we know other species might have better tech than us, and anything that can be reverse engineered or copied with time. Resources can be acquired through trade or conquest, but so far as we haven't found any species with a concept of desserts," the diplomat said with a smile. Suddenly, the Skulkian pulled the top off of the box of the extra cookies that he had been provided. The other delegates watched as he shoveled them into his mouth, chomping down on them as he shuddered in pleasure. Then he grabbed the boxes in front of the other 2 delegates, tucking them under his limbs as he scurried around the table to charge Agent Wakefield. She gasped in surprise as she was lifted up above its head in a multitude of limbs. "The cookie-making human is mine." He started running towards the exit. "Prepare my ship. We go to Earth. More cookies. More!" "Put me down," the agent was crying out as she was carried away. The human diplomat and the other two triumvirate delegates shared an awkward glance for a moment. Finally, the Norvian coughed and spoke up. Apologies, we'll, award you a trade contract. So you said that this is something called dessert?" The diplomat smiled. "Why, yes. Let me explain to you more about the best humanity has to offer." End of story. If you enjoyed this story and wish to support the author, the link is down below. If you would like to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so. They will also be listed in the description down below. But the easiest way to help this channel is to share it, subscribe, and like. And, as always, I will see you all in the next video, and I hope that you have a good one. Cheers!